lesson 1 of Daniel Shiffman's learning processing. Just going to pull that up here. So I'm just going to be going through the very first lesson of the textbook. I actually have it right in front of me. I've already gone through it. So I'm feeling quite good. Lesson 1 contains chapters 1, 2, and 3 in the book. So I think how I'm going to do this is I'm just going to sort of do a basic summary of the topics covered in each chapter. So he has at the beginning of the chapter a little overview of what topics will be brought up. And then also I might do a couple of the exercises from each chapter as well. I didn't realize I'd already done them, so I'm just going to pull those up. But here is the book I'm following. I've also gone through, I've gone to the Coding Trains YouTube channel and scrolled way down in playlists to the introduction processing tutorial videos, as well as playlist 1, 2, and 3 here. So all of those videos and playlists, I believe, correspond with the text or with the book. So I'm just going to get started here. So, chapter 1, in this chapter, we're not even really touching processing yet or coding at all. He's just sort of going over the pixel coordinate system, sort of how we're going to start drawing onto the sketch. We're also going through basic shapes and basic primitive functions in processing. He covers some grayscale, RGB, color mode stuff, and also some alpha transparency in color. So we're starting to think about how we might make a project in processing or what it might look like to draw in processing. So it's quite simple. We're not really doing much in terms of coding in this chapter. But at the end, we get a little exercise, which is to design a creature using simple shapes and colors. And we're going to just draw by hand right now and think about the code that we might use to draw that. So I've already sketched in the book my little project, but I thought it might be cool to just sketch it out here as well. Then I'm just using my Wacom here and a little processing sketch to draw that I created. So this is the character that I've decided to start with, sort of based off of Daniel Shiffman's Zug character. So we can sort of start to imagine what might go into drawing this character in code. We have a couple of ellipses. So we would use an ellipse function times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Say 8 ellipses. We have some rectangles in the glasses, so I would use the rect function for that. We have some lines. I would use the line function, and there would be some brackets here with arguments inside for each function as well. Some triangles I have. Triangle function, and hopefully in the future some color too. So that's like a very, very basic overview of chapter 1. We're not really doing much except sort of starting to wrap our heads around what a sketch is, what the canvas looks like, what the coordinate system looks like in code as well. And that is chapter 1. So chapter 2 goes more into processing. So we're going through downloading and installing processing, the processing interface, the sketchbook, what writing code actually looks like and where we would do that. And also we're going through errors, the processing reference the run button, and doing our first sketch as well. So a lot of that information can be found here in the processing.org website. How to download the reference we can pull up right away, and we can look for a bunch of different stuff here. We've already looked at some of the primitive shapes we might use in this chapter. We looked at it in chapter 1, but we didn't actually do anything in processing. So this is where we will begin to do that. So this is what the processing interface currently looks like for me. I have it in orange. You can change that, which is cool. You can change what it looks like. We're going to be writing our code in here in the white space. We have our run button and our stop button and a bunch of different stuff. So this is sort of what we're covering in chapter 2, just wrapping our head around what it looks like. And I'm going to be going through exercise 2-4 and 2-9 in the book. So exercise 2-4 was to take your code from the last exercise, so from the little sketch, and type it into the processing window to add comments and to describe what the code is doing, and also to add a print line statement. So I have that all set up here. I have my, I've commented everything I've done. So this is at the top of my project. My little flower is called Felix Flower. I've also used some different functions to draw some color on my sketch. I have a rect mode for the body. I've drawn legs, arms, body, bow tie, petals, head, glasses, so I've separated my lines of code as well using those comments. And I also have a print line statement here at the bottom, so when I hit run, it will print this in the console here. So I'm going to hit run, and this is what my little guy looks like so far. So not a lot of color or anything, but he's looking cute. I like him. I've just done that using pretty basic primitive functions here. Also, here in the console, it has printed out Funky Felix Flower in the house. So, welcome to the world, Funky Felix. The next exercise is exercise 2-9. So we're slowly just building up, sort of working with the same project and building functionality little by little. So using what you've designed, implement your drawing using 2D primitive shapes, arcs, curves, ellipses, lines, points, quad, rectangle, etc. Use the background and some color functions as well, color mode, fill, no stroke, stroke, all of that. So it's pretty much the exact same sketch as the last one, but I've added some different things here. I've changed the color mode, so I've set my RGB from a range between 0 and 100 here. Let me see what that's done. Okay, and yeah, there's some color now. So there is basically the exact same Funky Felix, but now with some color. And yeah, not much else has changed yet, but we're slowly building up different variations of this same project. But what I might do here, so that I'm making sure that I understand every line of code, is I might comment in so all I've done is just commented in what that line of code is doing. So here I have 100, 50, 0, 10, 9, 30. So all of my color functions will be in a range between 0 and 100, and we'll draw Felix in beautiful color. All right. Okay, chapter 3, I think chapter 3 starts to get a little bit more interesting. So this is really where we start thinking about the flow of a program, and not just sort of drawing a lot of primitive shapes right onto the screen, but actually thinking about how a program might run, what different elements we might want to have happening at the beginning of the program, what we might want to keep looping to make it more interactive. So some of the topics covered in chapter 3 are the flow of a computer program, the setup and draw functions. We're also introduced to some mouse interaction, dynamic processing sketch. We're making our first dynamic sketch, and we're also handling events such as mouse clicks and key presses. The setup and draw functions also introduce us to the idea of blocks of code, and how to separate, or we start thinking about wanting, or why we might want to separate different code into separate little areas. We know that the setup function, or the setup block, runs once in the program, and the draw, anything within the draw loop is going to keep happening over and over again. So that's going to introduce some level of animation and some dynamic options into our sketches. One of the exercises of note is we're going to redo our drawing from exercise 2-9, so the last one we did, and we're going to make it dynamic. So this is exercise 3-2. It's going to look pretty much the same as the last one, except now we have a dynamic sketch in that we have a setup and a draw loop. So there are different bits of code now that are blocked together in different areas. All the code in our setup only happens once, so these are things that we can do to initialize the program, things like drawing our canvas, setting the background color, maybe I just want that to happen one time, setting our RGB mode as well, setting our rect mode, and also the print line. I really only need that to print once, so yeah, I put that in the setup. Anything in the draw loop is going to happen over and over and over again. This is what it's going to look like. It looks exactly the same as the last sketch, but it is dynamic. It is now drawing all the shapes from Felix over and over and over again. So we do have some, although we can't see it, there is a level of dynamic programming happening here. And the next exercise of note that I think I will document here as well is actually a little bit interesting. It's a little bit different from these, so it doesn't have to do with the drawing of our character, but we are introduced a little bit to some mouse interactivity in this chapter as well, which is quite fun. So in exercise 3-7, we're asked to update the drawing exercise 3-4 that's on page 40 of the book, so that the line is thicker when the mouse moves faster on the X-plane. And the book gives us a little hint as well about using the stroke weight function, and also giving us the formula for how to calculate the speed of the mouse. So we have some built-in variables from processing called mouse x, mouse y, p mouse x, and p mouse y. So to get our formula for how fast the mouse is moving, we just subtract the previous mouse location from the current mouse location. And we're just doing that with the x. And we're putting that in the absolute function, the abs function. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull up the absolute value of mouse x minus mouse p mouse x. So basically, if it's a negative value, it's always going to return it as a positive value. And we're going to use that in tandem with the stroke weight function, and we're going to set that variable in the stroke weight. So it's gonna, if the value between mouse x and p mouse x, if the distance was very great, that value is going to be bigger, which means that our stroke weight value, or whatever is going in here, is going to be larger. So it's going to draw a thicker line. If the distance between mouse x and p mouse x was much smaller, so let's say the mouse moved very slowly, it's going to be a smaller number, which means that the stroke weight is going to be smaller as well. I'm just going to run this to prove that it works. So if I move the mouse really fast, that line gets very thick. If I move it very slowly, it's quite thin. And I'm also printing out the mouse speed value, so that absolute value calculation in the console, so you can see it running as I draw in this. So this is kind of the answer to that exercise, but if I just set this to a number that is not the mouse speed, then we just get a constant line. And that's like a little drawing program. So we've also learned how to make a little drawing program in this exercise. And I will also add that we were also introduced to the mouse pressed and key pressed functions in this chapter as well. So there are other levels of interactivity we can start introducing into our code. So the next element was the Lesson 1 project. The Lesson 1 project was sort of a way to amalgamate a lot of the concepts that we learned in chapters 1 to 3. The project is to design a static screen drawing using RGB color and primitive shapes. We're making the static screen drawing dynamic by having it interact with the mouse. So trying to use some of that interactivity we learned about mouse X, mouse Y, to change color, change shapes, have something follow the mouse around, maybe set size differently according to the mouse's location. So my code looks pretty similar, but I'm just going to run it here. This is what I've created at the end of lesson 1. I have Felix flower. We have separated little blocks of code, and I'm making sure to comment my lines of code as much as possible as well, just to keep track of what everything is, and so I know for myself in the future what everything is doing. Yeah, here is our dynamic Felix flower drawing. Okay, and that is like a very quick summary of chapters 1 to 3, which is lesson 1 in processing or learning processing by Daniel Shiffman. Some of the topics that we covered include downloading and working in processing, accessing the processing reference as well, processing.org. We went through what this looks like, what it actually looks like to write code, where we write the code, how we run the program, using the coordinate system. So what the origin of our sketches sort of here. This is 0, 0. Then everything on the x-axis is positive going towards the right. Everything on the y-axis is positive going down. We went through drawing primitive shapes, so we can draw a bunch of shapes now, which is really fun. We learned about the flow of a program and blocks of code and making sketches dynamic. So what is the difference between setup and draw? How thinking about where we might put certain lines of code, what we might want to happen over and over and over again versus what can happen just once. Making things colorful. We learned a little bit about RGB, HSB as well, and transparency. I haven't used transparency in this code, I don't think, but transparency is something that can be set as well. We learned about interacting with the mouse and keyboard as well. So having things follow our mouse, resetting things with our keyboard, and using printline for errors as well as another handy tip that was quite useful to learn. So if we're using printline not just to print Funky Felix flower in the house, but for example pulling up a value like with the drawing exercise to make that line thicker, we could use printline to see what the value of the mouse speed was to make sure that things are working. We can see that when that print line is sending us a higher number, the line is thicker. When it was sending us a smaller number, the line was thinner. So we can use printline in that way to debug our code in a lot of different ways. If something isn't behaving the way we want it to, we can use printline to see if those values are coming up in a certain way. And we also use and learned how to use a bunch of different functions, primitive shape functions like line, rect mode. We learned how to use background, stroke weight, no stroke, color mode, setup and draw were really useful. Void mouse pressed came up too, as well as an event kind of piece of code. Full screen and frame rate as well were handy to learn about in those chapters. So I will be going through them more in the processing reference and making use of those functions in any of the sketches I do in the future. Next one is lesson 2, which I think will be a little bit more hardy. That is chapters 4, 5, and 6. The lesson is called Everything You Need to Know. So looking forward to that one. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one, Isa.